Today we're going to talk about parallel lines cut by transversal. So before you've been exposed to parallel lines, this is the symbol for parallel lines. When two lines are straight up and down, side by side. That means something is parallel to something else. Looks like an 11 or railroad tracks turned straight up. Parallel lines are lines that never, ever intersect. They can go on forever in either direction, and they never intersect. They're parallel. And having the two L's inside the word help you can remember that they never touch. Perpendicular symbol looks like an upside down T. So they may say something is perpendicular to something else, like angle. They may say angle 1 is perpendicular to angle 4. Just because they've named them, then you know that they meet at a 90-degree angle. So perpendicular is at a 90-degree angle, perfectly 90 degrees. So when we talk about transversal is a new word you might not have heard before. Make sure you have it written down. So transversal is a line that passes through at least two other lines. Now we're talking about transversals going through parallel lines. So we're looking at a set of parallel lines, and we have to have at least two other ones, so there's two there, and then that transversal cuts through it. Does not have to be at 90-degree angle. Usually it's not. They try to trip you up a little bit. Usually it's at an angle. So, but it can be perfectly perpendicular. So make sure you understand what the word transversal means. So there's lots of angles that are made when we cut parallel lines with the transversal. The numbering of the angles does not matter. I numbered all of these the same, so you would see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 to kind of help us talk about these different angles. But they can number them any way they want. That's just to give them a name so we know what we're talking about. So the first type of angle we're going to talk about that occurs when we cut parallel lines with the transversal are corresponding angles. Now, corresponding angles are congruent, meaning they have the same value. What corresponding angles mean is they are on the same side in the same position. So we're going to start with some very basic ones. So if we look at angle 1, we're looking for something that's on the same side of the line, thinking about our parallel lines, and in the same position. So this one would be 5. So if I think about if I could pick up this bottom line, parallel line, and sit it on top of the other, 5 and 1 would sit on top of each other. So our first thing to know is that angle 1 and angle 5 is an example of corresponding. So let's find another one. So let's say we have, a different color here. So we have 2. So if I pick it up again and set it on top of the other one, 2 and 6 are going to be corresponding. So I can write those down. Angle 2 and angle 6 are corresponding. They have the exact same value. So if I knew one was 60, then its corresponding angle would be 60 as well. All right, let's go ahead and look at 3. So 3 corresponds with 7. So angle 3 and angle 7 are corresponding. And that leaves 4 and 8 to be corresponding. All right, let's go to our next one. Alternate interior angles are also congruent, meaning they have the same value. These are angles that lie between the two parallel lines and on the opposite sides of the transversal. Okay, so let's break that apart. They lie between the two parallel lines. Well, let's look at where our parallel lines are. So if we look at our parallel lines, here's our parallel line, and here's our parallel line. So these angles are going to be inside this area. So that just leaves with 3, 4, 5, and 6. So now we're going to break it down further. And on the opposite side of the transversal. Well, our transversal is here. So the lines we're talking about are inside the parallel lines or between the parallel lines and on either side, opposite sides of the transversal. So that leaves us with 3 and 6. They're inside the parallel lines and they're on opposite sides of the transversal. So that's an example of alternate interior angles. So 3 and 6 are alternate interior. That means they're the same value. So if 3 was 70, 6 would also be 70. And then 4 and 5 have the same value. They are congruent. Okay, these are alternate interior. Interior being the key word inside. Alternate, they alternate sides of the transversal. All right, our next word is alternate exterior angles. An alternate exterior, think about what the word exterior means, outside. And then alternate is every other or across from. So we're talking about angles that are outside the parallel lines this time. So let's think about where that is. So if we look at our parallel lines again, here's a parallel line, here's a parallel line. We're looking at angles outside of that. Well, we already know this is inside. So we're not looking at any of those. So we'll just kind of ignore those. We're looking at 1, 2, 7, and 8. And it has to be opposite sides of the transversal. Well, remember, our transversal goes right through these two, and we're looking at opposite sides. So here to here, that's opposite. Or here to here, that's opposite. So let's look at 1 and 8. 1 and 8, angle 1 and angle 8 are alternate exterior angles. That means they have the same value. So if I look at 8 and I look at 1, and if I knew 1 was 100, that means 80 has to be also 100 degrees. Where then 2 and 7 are also alternate exterior angles. All right. Our next one is consecutive interior angles. So we think about the word consecutive, that means in a row. That means side by side, next to each other, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever it may be. So they're consecutive, but these are interior. So again, we gotta look at that word, interior. So interior means inside. So if we look at our parallel lines again, here's our parallel lines, we're looking at inside. So we're not looking out here or out here, we're looking only inside. So if we look further to our definition, it says on the same side of the transversal. So again, our transversal is right down the center, and we're looking on the same side of the transversal. So in that case, that would be 3 and 5 would be consecutive interior. And these are a little bit different. They're not congruent. Together, they equal 180 degrees. So that way, if I know that 5 is 110, then I know that 3 has to be 70 to make up the rest of the 180 degrees. So together inside, they make up a supplementary 180 degrees. The same thing with 4 and 6. They are consecutive interior angles, and they together add up to 180 degrees. So on this one, we would have angle 4 and angle 6 equal 180 degrees, so they're consecutive interior, and angle 3 and angle 5 also equal 180 degrees, and they are consecutive interior because they're inside the parallel lines and they are on the same side of the transversal. All right, vertical angles we've talked about before. We'll go quickly over those. These are congruent. These are opposite angles that are diagonally across a parallel line. So if we look and we want to look at our parallel lines here, parallel line, and then our transversal cuts right down the middle or at an angle here. We are looking at vertical angles. So let's start with like number 1. We're looking at exactly what's vertical or opposite diagonally across the parallel lines. So cross here would be 4. So angle 1 and angle 4 are a pair. They are vertical. Now let's look at our next one. So let's see, angle 2 and angle 3 are directly across from each other. So angle 2, angle 3. Now we move on down to 5. Directly across, vertical, is 8. So angle 5, angle 8. And then our last one that we have, angle 6 is vertical to angle 7. So vertical can help you with lots of things to get started when you're having a very complex amount of problems. So we're going to use kind of what we learned, and we're going to look at a challenge problem. So this is a challenge problem. We've got 2 parallel lines, and we have to look a little close to see them, but we have a parallel line here and a parallel line here, and we have a couple transversals. We actually have, we could call this a transversal, we could call this a transversal, we could call this a transversal. So we're going to look and start with what we know. So the first thing it tells us is that angle F is 50 degrees. So I'm going to go ahead and label that. And it tells us angle B is 70 degrees. Well, if I look a little closer, I can see that this right here is a triangle. And I know that in a triangle, all of my degrees equal 180. So if I know that 50 is there and 70 is there, I can add together 50 plus 70, and I get 120. And then I know those together have to be added to E, and they all have to equal 180. Well, 180 minus 120 gives me 60. So I know this is 60. Now from here, I can start using my terms that I know. Well, E and D, if we look at their relationship here, they go along a straight line. So they're side by side. They're adjacent. You've learned about that word before. They are also supplementary or linear. They equal together 180 degrees. Okay, so we could take 180 minus 60 and we can find out what D is. So if we do that, we know it's 120. Now, also angle E here is opposite inside the parallel lines of C. So they're interior and they're opposites. So if you look at back at your words, things that are on the opposite side and interior, we already know they're interior, and they're alternate. Opposite means alternate. It's kind of like having an alternate person for your job or for a spot in a play. So these have the same value. So if E is 60, C is also 60. Now, if I know that B and C, and then if I need to find A right here, A, B, and C all together go across a straight line of 180 degrees. So I know 70 plus 60 plus something has to equal 180. So 70 and 60 gives me 130. And so if I take 130 away from 180, I get 50. So I know this has to be 50, which is A. And if I didn't realize that, also F and A are alternate on opposite sides of the transversal, alternate interior. They have to be the same. Okay? So now, when I go further, let's go into finding G. So together, G and F are supplementary or linear. So if F is 50 and they have together equal 180, then I know that G is 130. All right, so then if I look at further, think about what's across from each other. This 130 and 50 are also supplementary together. They have to equal 180. They're inside their consecutive interiors. And now let's look at I, and we'll look at H. So if we break apart this piece right here, so let's highlight this piece here. This is a quadrilateral, and we have to know how many degrees are in a quadrilateral, and that is 360. So total together, these sides together have to equal 360. All of these H, I, A, and G have to equal 360. So we already have G and A, so now we got to find H and I. So these are going to be together. Get a different color here. So here, G and H lie on a straight line. So together, they have to equal 180. So if they equal 180 and G is 130, this has to be 50. And then the same thing with A and I. If this is 50, this has to equal 130. And then if you add them all together, you get 360. So we found a very challenging problem, and we were able to find all the degrees just by being given a couple. Sometimes they don't give them to you in writing like this. They'll give them to you in words, not in degrees. So you have to read a little bit more about what they're telling you. Or they'll say angle BFE is 50. So you have to know how to read those angles.